The diary fell from between two boxes in the attic, its leather cover worn smooth by time and handling. My mother's elegant handwriting filled its pages, the same handwriting that had signed my birthday cards, written lunch notes, marked the height chart on the kitchen wall until her death 17 years ago. My name is Isabel, and at 31 I was finally cleaning out my childhood home's attic. My father had moved to Florida with Teresa, my stepmother, leaving me to prepare the house for sale. What I found would shatter everything I thought I knew about my mother's death. Something isn't right, my mother had written in an entry dated 3 months before she died. I saw Teresa with Victor again today. They didn't notice me at the cafe. She passed him documents under the table, papers with our family letterhead. I sat among the dusty boxes, my hands trembling as I read. Teresa had entered our lives 6 months before my mother's death, initially as my father's legal consultant at his manufacturing company. Victor, our family lawyer for 20 years, had introduced them. The diary entries grew more urgent. Victor's been pushing James to revise the estate planning, says it needs modernizing. But why now? And why won't he discuss it when I'm present? I remembered those days differently. Or rather, I remembered what I'd been told about them. How my mother had become paranoid near the end. How she'd imagined conspiracies due to the medication she was taking for her heart condition. Teresa's not who she seems, my mother had written. I've seen her true face when James isn't looking. The way she watches him, calculating. The way she's already measuring the house, suggesting updates that would erase every trace of me. A sharp creak from the attic stairs made me jump, but it was just the old house settling, not Teresa's perfectly manicured footsteps. She never came here anyway, claimed she was allergic to dust. The final entries were frantic, the elegant handwriting becoming jagged. Found proof today. Documents in Victor's office. He's been working with Teresa for months before he introduced her to James. They're planning something. Need to tell James, show him the evidence. Meeting Victor tomorrow to confront him. My mother died the next day. Heart failure, they said. Natural causes. I closed the diary, my mind racing. All these years I'd felt uneasy around Teresa, but dismissed it as normal step-family tension. The way she'd gradually influenced my father, isolated him from old friends, suggested he transfer assets for tax purposes. My phone buzzed. A text from Teresa. Darling, how's the attic cleaning going? Don't bother with old papers. Just toss everything. I looked at the diary in my hands, then at my mother's final words. Must protect Isabel's inheritance. Must stop them before... I spent that night reading every entry, tracing my mother's growing suspicions through the months before her death. She'd documented everything. Meetings she'd observed between Teresa and Victor, overheard phone calls, documents she'd glimpsed on Victor's desk. Teresa's background story doesn't add up, one entry read. Says she grew up in Seattle, but her knowledge of the area is vague. Claims to have graduated from Stanford Law, but when I mentioned professors I know there, she changed the subject. My mother had started investigating, quietly gathering evidence. She noted discrepancies in Teresa's work history, gaps in her background that no one else had bothered to question. Even then, Teresa had been playing the perfect professional, the sympathetic friend to my father, recently widowed from her own spouse. Found something disturbing today, my mother wrote 2 weeks before her death. Teresa's late husband? He didn't die in a car accident like she claimed. He's very much alive, living in Arizona with his actual wife. Who is this woman really? I pulled out my laptop, hands shaking as I searched for property records in Arizona. There it was. Richard Conway, Teresa's supposed late husband, still living with his wife of 30 years. They'd never divorced. Teresa's entire history was a fabrication. Another entry caught my eye. Victor's been pushing James to sign new documents, something about modernizing the trust structure. But the papers I saw on his desk, they're designed to shift control of the company. Complicated legal language about successor interests and contingent beneficiaries. Those same terms had appeared in documents my father signed last year. Papers Teresa had assured me were routine updates to protect the family's interests. I'd felt pressured to sign too, Victor explaining rapidly about tax efficiency and liability protection. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Teresa. Found any interesting family photos up there? I'd love to see them. Maybe I'll come help you sort through everything tomorrow. I thought about her perfect smile, the way she'd positioned herself as the caring stepmother while slowly taking control of everything. The house, the company, my father's social circle. Even now, she was probably worried I'd find something that would expose her carefully constructed lies. I needed help, someone who could understand the legal documents my mother had referenced. But I couldn't trust Victor. His fingerprints were all over this conspiracy. I needed an outside perspective, someone with no connection to Teresa or the family business. Opening my contacts, I found the number for Sarah Chen, a law school friend who specialized in estate litigation. If anyone could help me unravel this web of deception, it would be her. Sarah met me at a cafe far from my usual haunts, where there was no chance of running into anyone who might report back to Teresa. I brought the diary, along with copies of all the estate documents I could find. "This is interesting," Sarah said, flipping through the papers. "These trust modifications aren't just updates. They're completely restructuring ownership control. See this clause here? It essentially gives Teresa veto power over any major business decisions once your father turns 65. He turns 65 next month, I realized, my coffee growing cold as we pored over the documents. And look at this. The succession planning puts any future children of Teresa's ahead of you in terms of inheritance rights. Has she mentioned wanting children? I thought about Teresa's recent hints about feeling maternal, her sudden interest in family planning at 45. She's been talking about IVF, suggesting Dad's not too old to have more kids. Of course she has. Sarah's expression darkened. Because any child she has with your father would give her permanent control of everything. The company, the properties, the family trust. You'd be effectively disinherited. I pulled out my mother's diary. Mom suspected something like this. She was going to confront Victor the day she died. Sarah looked up sharply. The day she died? Was there an autopsy? Heart failure, I said. She had a pre-existing condition. Everyone said the stress of her paranoia probably contributed. Paranoia that turns out to be completely justified. Sarah made some notes. We need to move carefully here. These people, Teresa and Victor, they've orchestrated a sophisticated long-term fraud. If your mother was about to expose them... She left the implication hanging in the air. I thought about my mother's last day, how she'd seemed anxious but determined when she left for her meeting with Victor. What should I do? I asked. First, we document everything. I have a forensic accountant who can trace the money movements. Then we need to establish Teresa's real identity. Clearly, she's not who she claims to be. My phone buzzed. Teresa again. Darling, I noticed you took some papers from the attic. Anything interesting? I'd love to look through them with you. She's getting nervous, Sarah observed. Good. Let her wonder what you found. But be careful. People who've orchestrated something this elaborate can be dangerous when cornered. I thought about my mother's final diary entry, her determination to protect me, to expose the truth. 17 years too late, I was finally picking up where she left off. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah's investigation uncovered layers of deception. Teresa's real name was Teresa Blackwood. She'd pulled this same scheme twice before, insinuating herself into wealthy families, manipulating estate planning, then vanishing with significant assets once her position was secured. Look at this, Sarah said, spreading documents across her office desk. 3 different identities, 3 wealthy widowers, 3 compromised family trusts. She works with different lawyers each time, but the pattern is identical. I studied the photos. Teresa with different hair colors, different names, but always the same calculating smile. Always positioning herself as the perfect second wife while slowly taking control. And Victor? He's been disbarred in 2 states for ethics violations. Somehow got licensed here under a slightly different name. He specializes in finding vulnerable wealthy families, then introducing them to his clients. Women like Teresa who know how to play the long game. My phone buzzed with Teresa's hourly check-ins. We should have lunch soon, darling. I'm worried about you spending so much time in that dusty attic. It's not healthy to dwell on the past. I showed Sarah the text. She's been pushing me to hand over anything I found up there. Says she's concerned about my obsession with old papers. She's worried, Sarah noted. Probably realizes the diary is missing. Have you told your father anything? I shook my head. Over the years, Teresa had carefully isolated him, suggesting moves to new cities, subtle distance from old friends. Now in Florida, he was completely under her influence. We need solid proof before approaching him, Sarah advised. Something he can't ignore, even with Teresa whispering in his ear. That proof arrived unexpectedly. A private investigator Sarah hired found Teresa's previous victim, Robert Henderson, a retired executive who'd lost millions to her scheme. She was Teresa Morgan then, he told us over video call, claimed to be a grieving widow just like me. By the time I realized what she'd done, she'd vanished with half my assets. The lawyer who helped her? Sounds just like your Victor. I thought about my mother's final diary entry, her desperate need to protect our family from this same fate. Now, 17 years later, I had the evidence she'd died trying to find. My confrontation with Teresa was carefully orchestrated. Sarah advised me to meet her in a public place, with witnesses nearby and recording devices ready. I chose the same cafe where my mother had spotted her with Victor years ago. Darling, you seem tense, Teresa said, settling into her chair with practiced grace. I've been so worried. All this time spent digging through old things. It's not healthy. Actually, I found something interesting in the attic, I replied, sliding my mother's diary across the table. Mom's last diary. You remember my mom, don't you? Or should I say, Teresa Blackwood remembers her. The change in her expression was subtle but immediate. The warm concern vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her eyes fixed on the diary. And honestly, Isabel, these conspiracy theories are concerning, just like your poor mother. Like my mother who caught you plotting with Victor, who was going to expose you the day she died. I kept my voice steady, even as my hands shook under the table. We found Robert Henderson, by the way, and the Palmers. You know, your previous victims? She didn't flinch, but her knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. Those are ridiculous accusations. Your father will be very upset to hear you're spreading such lies. My father will be more upset to learn his wife is already married to someone else. Richard Conway sends his regards, by the way. His actual wife was very interested to hear about you. For the first time, real fear flickered across her face. Whatever you think you know. I know everything. I cut her off. The fake identity, the previous scams, Victor's disbarment. The only thing I don't know is what really happened the day my mother died. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. You clearly need help, just like your mother did. Sit down, I said quietly. Unless you want to explain everything to the FBI agents at the next table. Financial fraud across state lines is a federal crime, isn't it? She sank back into her chair, that perfect mask finally cracking. What do you want? The truth, starting with what you and Victor did to my mother. Teresa's composure crumbled completely. Her face twisted into something ugly and desperate, a look I'd never seen beneath her polished exterior. Your mother was going to ruin everything, she spat, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd found proof that Victor and I had worked together before, documents that showed my real identity. She was going to show your father that morning. My hands gripped the edge of the table. What did you do? We didn't mean for her to die, Teresa said, her eyes darting around the cafe. Victor just gave her something to make her confused during the meeting, to make her seem unstable, her heart condition. We didn't know it would. The FBI agents were already moving toward our table. They'd heard everything through the wire I was wearing. I watched as the color drained from Teresa's face when she realized what was happening. Teresa Blackwood, one agent said, showing his badge. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and involvement in the death of Catherine Andrews." I sat there, my whole body shaking, as they led Teresa away. Sarah appeared at my side, squeezing my shoulder. "Victor's been arrested too," she said quietly. "They picked him up at his office 20 minutes ago." My phone buzzed, Dad calling. He'd just been interviewed by the FBI at his home in Florida. "Isabel," his voice cracked. "Is it true? All of it?" "Yes, Dad. I found Mom's diary. She was trying to protect us. She knew what Teresa was planning." There was a long pause. "I should have listened to your mother's concerns. Should have seen through Teresa's act. I'm so sorry, sweetheart." For the first time since finding the diary, I felt tears roll down my cheeks. Not tears of anger or frustration, but of relief. My mom's last fight was finally over. She'd protected me through her words, through her determination to uncover the truth, even when she couldn't be here to do it herself. The evidence my mom had gathered, combined with what Sarah's investigation uncovered, was overwhelming. Teresa and Victor had orchestrated similar schemes before, but they'd never killed anyone. My mom's death may have been unintentional, but they were still responsible. As I left the cafe that day, I felt lighter somehow. The weight of years of unanswered questions, of subtle manipulations and hidden truths, was finally lifting. My mom's diary, her final gift to me, had exposed not just Teresa's deception, but also given me back something I'd lost: the truth about who my mother really was, and the fierce love that had driven her to protect her family until the very end. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The house I'd been preparing to sell became a source of comfort rather than painful memories. I spent evenings in my mom's old reading nook, going through her diary again and again, this time not searching for clues but simply connecting with her voice, her thoughts, her love for us that shone through every page. My dad moved back from Florida, temporarily staying in a condo nearby while the legal mess got sorted out. The investigation revealed that Teresa had already started transferring small amounts of money to hidden accounts. She'd been preparing her exit strategy, just like with her previous victims. If it hadn't been for my mom's diary, we might have lost everything. "I keep thinking about your mother's last days," my dad said one evening as we sat in the backyard, the same garden my mom had loved tending. The way Teresa and Victor dismissed her concerns made me doubt my own wife's sanity. I can never forgive myself for that. I reached over and squeezed his hand. The anger I'd felt toward him had mellowed into understanding. Teresa had manipulated everyone, playing a long game with the expertise of a career con artist. Even Sarah said she'd never seen someone this calculating. The FBI investigation uncovered more victims. 5 families, not 3 like we'd initially thought. Each time, Teresa had used a different name, different lawyer, but the same careful grooming of wealthy widowers. She'd perfected her act over the years, but my mom had seen through it. My brave, intelligent mother hadn't been paranoid. She'd been the only one clear-headed enough to spot the predator in our midst. The discovery about my mom's death hit the hardest. The medical examiner reviewed her case and found traces of a drug that would have interacted fatally with her heart medication. Not enough to rule it a homicide back then, but combined with Teresa's confession at the cafe, it was enough now. They were charging both her and Victor with involuntary manslaughter. I found myself spending more time at the office, diving back into my architectural work with renewed energy. My colleagues noticed the change in me. "You seem different," my assistant mentioned one day, "more confident somehow." She was right. Unraveling Teresa's deception had awakened something in me, a strength I inherited from my mom but had never fully embraced. I started speaking up more in meetings, pushing back against compromises I would have accepted before. The way my mom refused to back down when she knew something was wrong, that was part of me too. The estate lawyer helped us untangle the mess of documents Teresa and Victor had created. Most of their changes weren't even legal. They'd counted on no one examining the papers too closely. My dad insisted on putting everything in my name now. "It's what your mother wanted," he said, to protect your inheritance. But it wasn't about the money. It was about justice, not just for us, but for every family Teresa had targeted. Each new revelation in the case brought another layer of vindication for my mom. The paranoid woman had been right all along, and now everyone knew it. I kept the diary on my bedside table, no longer hidden away in a dusty attic. Sometimes, late at night, I'd open it and read random entries from happier days, when my mom wrote about her hopes for my future, her love for our family. Must protect Isabel's inheritance, she'd written at the end, and she had. Not just the material inheritance, but something far more precious, the truth. Sarah helped me prepare for the court proceedings. Teresa and Victor both took plea deals. They knew their scheme had finally unraveled completely. The day of their sentencing, I decided to make a victim impact statement. I needed them to hear what they'd stolen from me, from all of us. Standing at the podium in that courtroom, I looked directly at Teresa, her designer outfits replaced by prison beige. "You didn't just try to steal our family's assets," I said, my voice steady. "You stole 17 years of truth from me. Years I spent doubting my mother's judgment, believing she'd lost touch with reality in her final days. But she was the only one who saw you clearly." Victor couldn't even meet my eyes, staring down at his hands. His legal career was over. The bar associations in all 3 states were revoking his licenses permanently. The other families came forward too, each one sharing a similar story of manipulation and betrayal. Robert Henderson hugged me after the sentencing. "Your mother," he said. "She did what none of us could. She left behind the evidence that finally stopped them." My dad started seeing a therapist to process everything. "I need to understand how I let myself be so thoroughly deceived," he told me. "How I could doubt your mother like that." Slowly, he began reconnecting with old friends, rebuilding the social circle Teresa had systematically dismantled. The company needed attention too. Years of Teresa's influence had left their mark on the business. I took a leave of absence from my architectural firm to help my dad restructure things. It felt right, stepping into this role. Not because anyone pressured me, but because I chose it. My mom would have liked that. One afternoon, I found myself in her old office at the house, the one Teresa had quickly converted into her meditation room after moving in. I stripped away the bland beige paint Teresa had used to cover my mom's vibrant blue walls. Under the windowsill, I found a small heart my mom had carved, with our initials inside. She'd shown it to me once, her secret rebellion against the perfect showroom house Teresa wanted. "I'm thinking of keeping the house," I told my dad over dinner. "Not selling it after all." He smiled. "Your mother would love that. She always said this place had a soul." I nodded. "I keep finding little pieces of her everywhere. Things Teresa tried to erase but couldn't quite manage." The upcoming trial for my mom's death would be harder, but I was ready for it. The prosecutors were confident about the involuntary manslaughter charges. Teresa's confession at the cafe, combined with the new medical evidence, painted a clear picture of their desperate attempt to silence my mom. "You're so much like her," my dad said one evening, looking at an old photo of my mom in her garden. "She never backed down when she knew she was right, even when everyone else thought she was wrong." I touched the photo gently. "She never got to see them face justice." "No," my dad agreed, "but she made sure you would. Everything she wrote down, every piece of evidence she gathered, she did that for you." I thought about my mom's final diary entry, cut short by her confrontation with Victor. She didn't get to finish her last message, but she'd said enough. She'd given me the weapons I needed to fight back, to expose the truth, to reclaim our family's story. They say time heals all wounds, but I think the truth heals them better. It's been 6 months since Teresa's sentencing, and I'm finally feeling like myself again, or maybe a stronger version of myself. The nightmares about my mom's last day have stopped. Instead, I dream about her in her garden, smiling, proud of what I've become. The company is thriving now that we've cleared out all of Teresa's toxic influences. I split my time between running the financial side of things and my architectural work. My dad's retired for real this time, but he still drops by to mentor some of our younger employees. The light is back in his eyes, something I hadn't even realized was missing during the Teresa years. Sarah and I started a foundation in my mom's name, helping families affected by estate fraud. You'd be surprised how common it is. Predators like Teresa targeting vulnerable widows and widowers. We offer legal support, forensic accounting, and most importantly, a community of people who understand. Robert Henderson is on our board of directors, turning his pain into purpose just like we did. My mom's diary sits in a special place in my office now, a reminder of her courage and determination. Sometimes when I'm facing a tough decision, I'll open it randomly and read an entry. Her wisdom still guides me. Her strength still flows through my veins. The woman who saw through Teresa's perfect mask, who fought to protect her family until her last breath. That's my mother's real legacy to me. The house feels different too. No more walking on eggshells, no more hiding who we are. I've filled it with colors my mom would have loved, hanging her art back on the walls where it belongs. This isn't just the house where I unmasked a con artist anymore. It's home again, finally. Last week, I found one last letter from my mom, tucked inside an old book in her office. Not part of her diary, but a separate note written just days before she died. My dearest Isabel, it began. If you're reading this, trust your instincts. I've raised you to see the truth, even when others try to hide it. I keep thinking about how my mom fought alone, carrying the weight of her discoveries while everyone dismissed her concerns. But she never gave up. She kept gathering evidence, kept writing in her diary, kept trying to protect us until the very end. She made sure the truth would find its way to me, even if she couldn't be here to reveal it herself. The trial for my mom's death starts next month. Teresa and Victor will face new charges, their carefully constructed facades completely shattered. But I'm not afraid anymore. Every time I walk into that courtroom, I'll bring my mom's strength with me. Her diary rests in my bag like a shield, her words guiding me forward. My dad said something beautiful yesterday as we sat in my mom's garden, now blooming again after years of Teresa's neglect. Your mother's greatest gift wasn't exposing Teresa, he said. It was showing you your own power, the power to stand up, to seek justice, to protect what matters. He's right. Through her diary, my mom taught me that one person's determination to uncover the truth can change everything. She couldn't finish her fight, but she made sure I could finish it for her. And now, sitting in this garden she loved so much, watching the flowers she planted bloom again, I know that some legacies can never be stolen. They just grow stronger with time.